Welcome back to the channel. My name is Philip, and in today's lesson we're going to cover 3 positional red flags or mistakes that I see way too many people make in chess, and it just ends up hurting their rating, and they're so easily avoidable. So if you're a returning viewer or subscriber, you will know that we have these videos jam-packed with examples like these ones that we're going to go through, so that you guys can see these in action and apply them to your games straight afterwards. And if you're a new viewer, I promise you're going to want to watch to the end, because it's just going to help you improve your chess. All right, so let's get into it. The very first one is this position, and it looks pretty equal, and it is pretty equal, and it's black to move. So here, black played the move queen to h4. And now the positional mistake that this is it essentially leaves that back rank undefended. So what I want you guys to take away from this is the first positional mistake is watch out for a weak back rank, and there's a part 2 to this. I'll show you the tactic. So as soon as you start to think about a move like queen to h4, your spidey senses should tingle and tell you something feels wrong with this move. And what it is it's just weakening that back rank. So here white pounces with rook to c8. Now the real issue with this is when you play something like king to g7, with this type of a pawn structure and the king on g7, it looks super solid, and honestly it is quite solid. But there is a follow-up positional threat that is very, very tricky to find. You probably wouldn't even spot it in a game unless you've seen it before. And that is this f8 square is very, very weak. So how does white take advantage of that? If you guys can spot it, props to you. This one's a tricky one to find, but queen to a3 is the follow-up move. And now we are essentially threatening to infiltrate with the queen. So the immediate threat is if something like b6 is played, white plays queen to f8 and queen to h8 checkmate. So black's got to defend against that threat. g5 doesn't help. It's just mate again with the queen on f8 in a couple of moves. So black is essentially forced to give up the knight with knight to b4. But there are a couple of ways that black can defend, and the first one is by recognizing that the queen could come in with check. So why doesn't black play king to h7? Well, we've got the same idea in mind. Now, there's nothing black can do to stop white's queen infiltrating. The best black has is the rook comes to c6, but the queen just jumps here straight away, threatening the pawn, and checkmate. Black takes the rook, queen takes f7, and now after king to h6, knight e7, attacks the rook and threatens mate on g6, and after queen g5, white takes that rook back, and white is just absolutely winning in this position. So now let's take a look at this position right from the start. Can you kind of see how it's so easy to play a move like queen to h4, thinking, okay, I'm going to start putting some pressure on my opponent, but your spidey senses should tingle, and especially that f8 square. Again, you can see how masked it is. It's so tricky to find, right? You just have to know it, and once you know it, remember it for your games so that you don't fall for this. This example here is the same concept. See if you guys can spot it. Same concept with a little bit of an extra flair, because this happens quite often in games. Or I don't mean often as in like once every 10 games, but this theme comes up over and over again. So here, white's got 2 moves. Rook to c8, or the even trickier, knight to d7. They're both pretty much the same thing, but we can really rub salt in black's wound by playing knight to d7. So we're attacking the rook, and the rook can't drop back to b8 to defend the back rank. So black plays rook to d6, thinking, okay, I'm attacking the knight, The d4 pawn is weak, and my king's got this escape square, so no issues here. But again, it's that same f8 square. Check, the king comes up. This time it's the knight. And this kind of yo-yo thing, you'll see as a way to escape with a perpetual check draw if you're losing, but also, as in this case, check, mate. There's heaps of mating threats that come up with it. So you want to keep that back rank safe, and particularly that f8 square, you want to keep that covered. Know it, it's a positional mistake people make, and then they wonder how they lose tactically so quickly afterwards. All right, so positional mistake number 2 is allowing your opponent to make an outside passed pawn. So an outside passed pawn is, I'll show you what it is in a second if you guys don't know, but this is a very equal position, as equal as it gets. Slight difference in the pawn structure, and black, you could argue, has slightly more active pieces, but it's pretty equal. So white to move, white plays b4 here. And white wants to capture on a5, and it looks quite normal. The problem here is black's best move is something like h5, threatening h4, trying to create some play, and not really being bothered if, let's just say, we play h5. Why is this not working? h5. We're not really bothered with these pawns being exchanged, because if something like queen to b5 is played, we simply respond with rook to d2. And again, like we said, black, you can argue, has slightly more active pieces. In this case, black definitely has more active pieces, and it's a slight advantage for black. So that is what black is worried about. The mistake that people make is they will take, and before they know it, their opponent is going to play a5. And after these pawns are traded, white is left with a pawn, which is called an outside pass pawn, which is free to roam on the edge of the board up to become a queen. And this essentially is why in this position, when black has traded on b4, white has a decent advantage. It's still, there's heaps to play for, but white is the only one who can win here. So let's just say black plays h5 in this position. We've got a couple of good options. One is h4, which is always a good idea, just to block that counterplay off. Or we can play the immediate a5, and you can kind of see if black avoids it and maybe, I don't know, just protects that pawn. Queen to d6 is also a move to protect the c pawn. We can simply push that pawn to a6. Or if black trades, again, there's not really much black can do to stop that pawn. It's a devastating advantage for white in this position. And the mistake that black made, again, we start with a very equal position. The positional mistake that black made is not being aware that when you capture like this, the pawn structure changes in a way where your opponent has that outside pass pawn. And just to show you another example of how subtle this is, but how deadly it can be, another equal endgame in this position, h4, and maybe you can see the pattern now already, right? So bishop c6, again, it's quite equal, but white starts pushing for ideas, so g4, and here black again has got to be very careful, because if you take, and then play a throwaway move like b5, white crashes through and wins the game. That's how deadly an outside pass pawn can be. So watch out for these types of situations. Here, black should always be careful. And you can kind of see the pawn structure is like this. And once these two pawns come up, we look back at the other example. Again, it was a5, a4, and that b4 pawn came up, essentially enticing black to exchange unfavorably. And I'll give you one more example for this one. You can kind of see white has 3 versus 2 on the queen side, and after c4, which is the best move, B takes c4 is definitely not the best move for black, but if black did play that, you get a very similar situation where you can kind of see what white's plan is going to be. It's going to be to push these pawns forward, trade on b5, and then scurry that pawn up the board and make a queen and win the game. So avoid creating outside pass pawns for your opponent. Now, positional mistake number 3 is when you start, or when your opponent starts trying to pick up free pawns, but it takes way too long to get the free pawns. So in this case, black's got a slight advantage. We are black in this position, and we have a bit of an attack going. So we're pretty comfortable with this position. White, our opponent, plays queen to a4, thinking, I kind of like this free pawn on a7. But the problem is, let's just take a move back. Let's just think about how many moves it's going to take for this pawn to be captured. 1, 2, and then to get the queen back, 3, and then 4, just to bring the queen back. So essentially, if it's going to cost you 4 moves to take a pawn and then reset your position, what you're essentially doing is you're not winning a free pawn. You're actually giving your opponent 4 free moves. And in 4 moves, you can lose the game completely. So let's just see what happens in this game. So the starting position, it's about negative 0.4 for black. And after queen to a4, bishop c8, just to show you a fun little sample line, because it's quite cool. Knight c4, attacking the bishop. The rook defends the bishop. And now we bring this bishop on onto this diagonal. The bishop is threatening the knight on c3. So the immediate threat is knight takes b2, rook takes b2, and then we pick up the free knight. So that bishop's going to drop back. f4, we start breaking through. And now white senses the danger on the king side, so white's got to bring that queen back. Otherwise, I mean, what is that queen doing there? It's just all of the action is happening around here, and that queen is doing nothing on a7. So that is again, it's one of these spidey senses. You need to develop that spidey sense where something should feel wrong with going after a pawn on a7 like this when you're just going to lose so many moves. So white comes back to their senses, queen to a4, but it's way too late by now. It's -5 advantage for black. Even though black's down a pawn, the computer's saying it's a -5. So you're essentially a rook up. That's how strong your position is. We follow up with f3. We're threatening to take on e2 and then fork these two little ones. So take, and then we've got a couple of options as white. Moving the bishop back, moving the bishop to h3. They all lose. Let's just look at one, which is taking the pawn. Knight takes f2. Breaking through. Now, once the king takes, we take this one. The bishop takes, and then rook takes f3. And now the king's got to drop back to g1, but fun little line, if we take, or if our opponent takes, check, check, and then whichever way we go, let's say here, it's check, mate. How beautiful is that? And what has white done in that time? White has won the pawn on a7 and hasn't even got their queen back to the defense. So positional mistake number 3, just to repeat it, is going after pawns when it's going to cost you a whole bunch of moves to win a free pawn. Watch out for those sneaky free pawns. They are not free. They're going to cost you the game. So hope you guys liked this video. Hope you guys got something out of it. Another video should pop up on the end screen. Click on it to view some more interesting chess instructional content. And see you guys on the other side. Peace out.